a boxing betting expert.
I know, David.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
He really gets into the nitty-gritty of this whole thing.
James, thanks very much for joining us. Let's get straight into it. So we know each other from Twitter. This is a lot of the reasons why people are coming on these chats are through Twitter. So that's our background. Make no further ado about it. Let's get into it. So what is your first boxing memory? What was the first fight you saw as a child?
First boxing memory wasn't actually a fight itself. I knew who Muhammad Ali was. I grew up in the 70s. And I was a huge fan without ever watching him box. And I saw this guy called Leon Spinks had beaten him. I'm going, how is that possible? You know, because to me, he was like Superman. The first actual fight I remember, and it probably wasn't the first one I saw, was Hagler beating Alaminta, which was such a destruction. And I'd never seen Hagler before. I was like, oh my God, who is this dude? And that was one of the most incredible things to this day I've ever seen, with all the bottles flying in the ring afterwards, and Hagler having to be shielded by his cornermen. And I'm going, holy
when
shit!
Was that? Early 80s.
I think that's 1980.
1980 was it? Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm like 9 years old at the time.
Great, brilliant, interesting. So, and how did you get into the sport? Was your father into it? As a family member, a friend?
Oh, very much. I see. I'm the youngest of six. And I've got two older brothers who are like 9 and 10 years older than me. So bear in mind, if you work in class at that time, boxing was a very mainstream sport. It was on all there were no other channels. So the BBC One, ITV, they showed boxing live all the time. My dad was a big boxing fan. Now, his twin brother was a boxer at amateur level and liked a street fight as well. And going back further on the McGuigan side of our family, we had boxers. This is going back to the 20s. Like Mick McGuigan, my great uncle, was one of Jack Dempsey's sparring partners.
Oh wow!
So, and another one of the brothers that was a prize fighter. Don't know his name, but we definitely had boxers sort of that way in the family going back a bit. And so my dad's twin.
Do you have like family archives of photos of like documents of that and stuff?
No, that's just something that's been passed down. But my dad's twin. I only met my dad's twin once when I was 8 because he lived in America for most of my childhood. But yeah.
And is that McGuigan any relation of the McGuigans?
No, I asked my dad that. They're from Clonus. Now they're about 15 miles up the road.
Okay.
So I will say my dad's mom, the one photo we've got of her, looks exactly like Barry McGuigan's dad.
Right.
But Dad, I'm sure Dad would have found out if we were related to the McGuigans. So. Apparently not. No.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So I've seen on Twitter you're pretty good at picking results, and you've got pretty strong with your opinions. So what do you think about this narrative that a lot of people will accuse people of? If you've never boxed, you can't judge boxing. Do you have a sort of a stock response to that?
It's such nonsense. I mean, I boxed briefly at school. I was in the boxing club, but I was really bad at it. Okay. And the school I went to was quite rough. There were quite a few ruffians. So it's not a sport you can coast at. It's not like tennis where if you get your ass beat, who cares?
Yeah.
So after a couple of months, I stopped it. I will say this much. Boxers and boxing trainers are some of the worst judges of how a fight is going to turn out. Angelo Dundee admits this. He says, I'm terrible at predicting how fights. And Angelo Dundee is considered by many best of all time, certainly in the conversation for the greatest coach of all time.
Yeah.
Listen to Teddy Atlas. He's forgotten more about boxing than I'll ever know. Yeah. But he cannot predict a fight to save his life.
Yeah.
You know, so it's absolute nonsense. Now, I'm sure there are certain aspects of boxing that would be helped by being a boxer. But as far as judging it, predicting it, who's going to be what? Not at all. Absolute nonsense.
I agree. And I think I've got a few examples of those ex-fighters who are absolutely on a pedestal for me. Top 5 all time, but as soon as they give me a prediction, I'm like, oh no, don't listen to this guy.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So so some great fighters from the 80s, obviously. Who would be your favorite of all time?
I really struggled with this one when you mentioned it. I always go with Ray Leonard because most of my boxing watching formative years was in the 80s.
Yeah.
That period, you know, I did have a huge soft spot for Tommy Hearns because I wanted to be like Tommy Hearns because I was tall and skinny. And I thought, oh, Tommy Hearns can do that. He's got amazing power. Then when I put these big burgundy boxing gloves on. I could barely lift them, you know. So I thought, I'm not Tommy Hearns. Turns out I wasn't Tommy Hearns after all. Leonard, just because he beat everyone. He was in a phenomenal era, and he beat every single great fighter he fought. You know, some controversial decisions in there, of course, but he was sort of like the star of that period.
Yeah.
I love the fact that he could box, but he was also as tough as anyone. I would argue tougher than any of the Fantastic Four. His mental strength is just insane, and I rate that very highly with boxers' mental strength.
I think that's brilliant, and also, they were just before me, so I grew up seeing Tyson in his prime, but that era of the early '80s kind of was before me, and now the sort of the Sugar Ray Leonard thing, I've only come to sort of later in life, retrospectively, without witnessing it in real time. So you're so lucky to see that in real time, and also, you know, what happens is when you sort of have a teenage view of boxing, it changes as you get older. So my teenage view of Mike Tyson was he was the best thing ever. My adult view is not quite the same. My teenage view of Sugar Ray Leonard was he was a pretty boy, and that's interesting.
100%.
That interesting, the point you've made of how strong, how hard he really was. I only realized that when the visuals of what he looked like were not important to me, and I realized what he actually did in the ring retrospectively.
Leonard's so interesting because you have to bear in mind that he was regarded as a sort of sob story at boxing for a long time.
Right.
He had to retire at a young age because of the detached retina. There's no way you can continue boxing with that.
Right.
Then he decides to come back with not even a tune-up fight, move up and fight Hagler, who reasonably is considered by some to be the greatest middleweight ever. And you think, you're out of your mind. People really disliked him for that. They thought, you cocky son of a bitch.
Right.
How dare you come up and take something from Marvin, who's beloved by boxing fans in particular. And then he has this sort of Indian summer of a career, which is still really, really fascinating and very sort of legit. You know, he still kept on beating real guys. It was amazing.
Right. And I think that's also very different of that era. That the old tune-up fights were non-existent. These guys, Ali came back straight in it. You know, now when you have a little bit of layoff, you go really soft when you come back for your tune-up, and that's been true. Yeah.
Well, Leonard was interesting. Leonard said at the time, because he did, I think it was Kevin Howard. He came back briefly in something like '84, got knocked down by Kevin Howard, who, well, not a scrub, wasn't like top tier, and he said the only way he could really get himself up for a comeback was if it was Hagler first time. Right. You know, there's no point. Yeah. I'm not putting myself through that training, through that hell to just fight some dude.
Yeah,
that's
very different. So, and what about in terms of live fights? So, have you been to many live fights? Have you seen any great fights?
Never seen a fight. I have mobility issues, like sitting up for long periods is tricky for me. I have a problem with my spine, so I've never been to see a sort of fight live. I did see, this was at school, we did Father Hudson's Homes was like a Catholic charity. There was a boxing benefit that the kids from boxing club did, and this lad who'd been boxing since he was 8 was fighting one of the school bullies, and he beat the living crap out of him for 3 rounds. That's my favorite fight live.
Right, nice. Yeah.
It was sort of like kind of thing you kind of dream of happening to someone, a real gobshite, and got beaten up by a pretty decent lad who was a very, very good boxer. And it's kind of what I kind of like about boxing in a nutshell. That was.
Yeah, I mean those things, they're all seeds. They all go in there, and they're things you think about. You know, from scraps in the playground to movies you've seen to training on videos. So what about on TV then? What if you could go back all those 40 odd years? Then your highlight number one fight you've seen on TV?
I still think it's Ben Eubank won. I think for me, boxing's always about box office. It's always about personalities. So those two personalities were so different. You couldn't get two more unlike people. And like Nigel Benn despised Eubank with his whole soul. You know, he'd never seen a black guy like that in his life. And none of us had this weird looking head and this like little Lord Fauntleroy voice.
Yeah.
And I instantly root for the bad guy. I wanted Eubank to win really badly. And it was such a back and forth battle. And when he finally won, it was amazing. The fight itself is incredible, but the whole build-up, those clash of personalities, I genuinely think that's Nigel Benn's best performance.
Yeah.
No, I'd say beating Gerald McClellan's a better achievement. But in terms of what's brilliant about Nigel Benn, he beat the bejesus out of Eubank's body for so long in that fight. And it's a really great performance.
I agree. I remember I rewatched it for the first time in 30 years about a week ago, and everything you say was brilliant. It was the whole, and also it's one of those ones. It's aged really well with time. Like the characters that we sort of took for granted back then. When you see them now, you're like, oh my god! And there's a Four Kings documentary. I don't know if you've seen it on Amazon Prime. It covers Ben Eubank, Lennox, and Frank Bruno, and it's a brilliant documentary. Because
I haven't. I must watch that. I have heard.
So
I know it's around.
Yeah, brilliant.
The other one is actually from that period as well, though it's slightly dodgy in that it's Watson Eubank too, because of the tragic end.
Yeah,
but that is an incredible fight.
Unbelievable.
It's like Michael Watson was such an amazing fighter. For Eubank to even come through that, he clearly hadn't prepared properly. You know, he'd taken him for granted, and what happened. But that era is incredible,
unbelievable. And so I agree with that first Ben Eubank fight. So, but would you rank Ben above Eubank on the basis of that?
Yeah, no. He loses and draws to Eubank. I think Eubank's a bad style matchup for Ben. If you were ranking on the achievements, I think you'd have to go with Ben. I think he's just had a slightly better caliber opponent. Because he beat Gerald McClellan. And there is a question mark over the McClellan fight. I don't know if you're aware that McClellan had headaches after the Julian Jackson fight.
No, okay.
He did, very persistent headaches.
Right.
The theory, and I kind of believe this because of Julian Jackson hit like a truck. Perhaps there was a weakness already, and the brain injury was always going to happen at some point. So maybe Ben got the better of that, got the benefit of that in that fight, tragically.
Yeah, that was awful. That was the old getting on his knees and just that weird blinking, the repeat blinking. And then you see that. And again, like you said, these little things that you remember from when you're younger, that now, if I ever see a fighter do that, I get a panic attack. I get that deja vu of that's what he was doing, that blinking.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what about, I don't know what the answer to this one is, but if you could have a fantasy matchup, what would that be across eras?
Yeah, that's a good one. One I would really like to see, and it's probably, it's definitely because I'm a big Ray Leonard fan. I hear a load of boxing fans who are very anti-Leonard, probably because he was a media-friendly fighter. And they always reckon he ducked Aaron Pryor. And I was thinking, he ducked him to fight much better guys, bigger and better guys. You know, Pryor was great. Leonard would annihilate him. I have no doubt in my mind that Leonard would be. That's why I would like to see Ray Leonard against Aaron Pryor. Leonard's like Pryor is smaller. He's not as good a boxer, and Pryor is smaller.
Yeah.
Leonard always found a way, and as great as Pryor was, Hagler and Hearns and Duran were greater. So that is one I would like to see.
Brilliant. I don't think anyone's going to answer that. I don't think anyone's going to have that answer. That's great.
And
the
thing is, it's because boxing is such a weird sport that we're going to have fantasy matchups from the same era sometimes. Can you imagine tennis if Federer and Nadal around at the same time never played each other? They've played about 50, I don't know how many, but certainly dozens of times. In boxing, you can have Terence Crawford and Errol Spence at the broadly same way of just avoid each other somehow for a decade, and it's just absurd
until they're in their mid-30s and the magic's gone.
Yeah, totally, exactly the same.
So this is interesting. We've done 10 minutes, and we haven't yet mentioned a heavyweight. This is fantastic. So, what do you think is the best? And that wasn't a leading question, but what do you think is the best weight division and why?
I had to think about this, and I typically go with middleweight, and really there are a couple of reasons. I think it's the right balance between sort of speed, skill, and power. That a heavyweight will knock anyone out, but their bodies aren't. They're not going to be moving as fast. That just because of the laws of physics, they're going to run out of gas quicker. Things like when I get down to flyweight and strawweight, and maybe a bit above, I can't take it super seriously. Now, bless them, but I know that even a club heavyweight fighter could knock them out. So, and there's loads of punches thrown, but they're only tiny little dudes.
Yeah.
Also, middleweight, by definition, almost has to be more competitive because more men on the planet are about that size, roughly speaking. Of course, if you were to take loads of weights, there'd be a load of obese people throwing the average out. But I think middleweight is always going to be a really interesting division.
Right.
I will say there is something special about heavyweights, the baddest man on the planet, the guy who can beat everyone. So that'll always have this, kind of blue ribbon kind of place in my heart as well.
I agree. Great answer. Brilliant. Okay, so what about you can't be a boxing fan without being aware of controversy. So if you could change one rule in the sport, what would that be?
Yeah, personally, I think this one most people don't mention that I would change the number of rounds in world heavyweight fights to 11.
All right.
You would get less draws, fewer draws that way. I don't like draws, and because it's more likely to happen with an even number.
Sure.
Now, you could go for 13, but so many people are superstitious, particularly in boxing. They'd never go for that. And also, of course, there were 15 rounders, but I like the move away from 15 rounders because I don't like brain damage. I understand why people miss it. There were some great 15 rounders, of course. I'm not crazy about people who score rounds even. Like I've heard people so many times on boxing forums, they say this was a total robbery, and then you see their scorecard, and they've done like 3 or 4 rounds even. And I went, well, if you flip that and take one guy won it by this much, well, then it's not a robbery, is it? So
we could do a whole episode on that conversation alone. I hate scoring around. The whole point of boxing scoring is you win by a huge amount, it's a 10-9. You nick the round, it's a 10-9. Very rarely do you score even, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But that would be very interesting. I'd love to actually know the numbers then. If in 15 rounders, historically, going back and looking at the data, whether draws were less frequent than they are now. And just, I've never thought about that, the even number, odd number thing, but it kind of feels like you're right. It kind of feels that we do have more draws than we did when there were 15 rounders.
Yeah, no, I don't know what the old scoring system was like because I'm so used to the 10-point must scoring system. I don't know how they scored fights in the old days because I know there were other scoring systems around. But it would make sense that there were with odd numbers that there'd be fewer draws.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, what's the fight you'd like to see most in the next 12 months?
When I first thought about this, I put Jake Paul against Alexander Usyk, just because he'd get the beating he deserves. Being serious,
maybe even Usyk's got a price. I don't know.
We'll see. We'll see. Gervonta Davis against Shakur Stevenson. I could definitely get behind that one. I'm a bit sentimental, so I would like Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn.
Oh wow!
Will it happen? Conor Benn doesn't seem the right size still. I think he would have to bulk up at sort of 2 weight classes. I don't know if they can find the catch weight. I know Eubank wants that fight. I know Conor Benn wants it. I think the punters would go for it. So
I agree.
I could get behind that.
Yeah, it's a weird one as well because I think Eubank I don't think he even thinks he's got much left, but obviously that's the biggest paycheck for him. So that'll probably happen. Okay, so in your years of following sport, you can do some humble brags and some straight out brags and some modesty here. So what has been your best hot take where you think, I got that one, and also your worst cold take where you just you missed entirely?
Right. I misunderstood this one. See, I thought we were talking about controversial takes. So my one was that actually it's one that it's like when people say what boxing opinion will have everyone like you're an idiot. Mine is that Thriller in Manila isn't a good fight, or
right.
I just don't like it. I just think it's 2 guys past their prime, and it's sluggish. I don't think Frazier is ever in that fight. I honestly don't. Obviously, I knew the result going in, but I just think it's it's 2 dudes getting brain damage, and I find it really hard work.
That is a hot take. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Love that one.
And for worst cold take, that one I thought it was asking what was the worst opinion that you regularly hear.
Oh, that's good. We'll do that.
My one was that this fight is fixed. And that applies to so many. Well, particularly the Jake Paul Tyson fight we just saw. Everyone say this is rigged. This is as if you need a special sort of reason for a 58-year-old to lose a fight.
Yeah.
What I do think is to know that boxing is corrupt. I think, yeah, definitely, it absolutely is. But it doesn't take the form of, envelope stuff with cash. What happens is judges, they're human. They know that if they consistently score against the money fighter, they won't get to stay in Caesar's Palace. They won't get to meet the superstars. They won't be meeting Jay-Z and Beyonce or whoever at ringside. They won't be getting the big fights. They'll be frozen out. So they score favorably, and referees will always favor the money fighter. So that's where the corruption in boxing is. It's not like people taking dives and stuff.
Yeah, of course. The old brown envelope thing is not a thing. But I also think whether they're actively doing it or it's a subconscious thing that just 2% of their mind is aware of it, that's also valid. And I also think there's a massive thing that when we watch on TV, we don't. So there's 3 judges. They're each on a different side of the ring. So they have 3 different. They have 3 different views. Now, you can see an entirely different fight from 3 different points of view. Like most of the time, it's going to be the same thing you experience, but it's occasionally you will see an entirely different perspective. Even sometimes when you watch it on TV, you the cameraman's got the wrong angle, and you're like, I can't see what's going on here. You can't. You're blinded. So I think, and also there's the whole thing of like, when a result occurs that you didn't want it to occur, it's nice to blame someone else than just accept
100%. I mean, it's good to rewatch fights, because when you do, you go, oh, wow, I missed a whole load. And often it's because you're listening to the commentary and you're getting a little bit fooled by them. It's so easy to do.
Well, I strongly believe when I'm scoring a fight, I go full nerd mode. I'm like, concentrate, silence everywhere, no beers, nothing.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can't do it and do something else. You can't chat and score a fight accurately. You can't.
Oh, not at all.
You can't.
Joe Rogan always says that. He said it's so difficult to call a fight when you're actually commentating on it, or actually score it. It's impossible. Yeah.
Well, so the commentators who are giving their scorecards, I'm like, you're commentating, which is brilliant. Do that job. Don't worry about scoring, because you can't possibly be doing it as the service it needs to be accurate.
Totally. So you're running with a narrative when you're doing the commentary. If you're doing it properly, you're talking about his training and all the rest of it, and then while that's happening, loads of interesting things are happening in the fight. There's ring generalship, there's like throwing feints and so on. You've got
producers shouting in your ear. You're planning going to the ad breaks. There's all this stuff going on. But I've become very good at tuning out the commentary. Like I literally, it's just if I'm scoring a fight and they say fighter A is dominating this round, and I feel fighter B is dominating, I just discredit it. I just completely give it my own. Because I like to, when people say that's a controversy, I like to say, oh, I scored at this. I feel pretty confident in the scorecard, or I'm not that confident, but I still scored it. I don't just cry robbery without actually having a scorecard that I would be.
Oh, that's another thing. People say robbery, and they haven't scored the fight right by round. They're just on their general impression. I've seen loads of fights where if it was a 1-round fight, 1 to 12 and 1 round, the one guy would have won, but actually one guy was nicking every little round very cleverly.
Absolutely, exactly. Okay, brilliant. So how about, what do you think your most overrated boxer and the most underrated, either now or historically?
Overrated was very easy. Mike Tyson. I think I'll say about Tyson, I think he's the best technical heavyweight in history. Like, I've never seen a better technician at heavyweight. Wow. I think his style is really difficult to do. There's a high level of difficulty with that particular front-on style. And you're a small guy. He's small for the division. Yeah. I often ask people, find me a technical flaw in Tyson, and they can't. He doesn't have one. But I think Teddy Atlas summed him up very well when he called him a mental midget. And I think that's very true. I've never seen Tyson. I'm fairly certain Tyson's never overcome adversity in the ring. And I scored that very highly with great heavyweights. Every time he was up against it actually in the ring, he folded, folded against Evander Holyfield twice, against Lennox, in those sort of legacy fights. I think that's where you sort of rank greatness. Related to that, most underrated, I still think Lennox Lewis is hugely underrated. I think among journalists, journalists never like a boxer who's more intelligent than them. And Lennox is one of those guys, I think. The first bet I ever had on boxing was among friends, and it was Lewis to beat Mike Tyson. And they were also convinced that it was just like £10, £20, three friends. Only one paid up, but I had the bet. And I was so convinced that Lennox Lewis was going to beat Tyson. Everyone at press row for that fight beforehand was calling for Tyson. Said Tyson's going to win it.
Wow.
Colin Hart, other son, every
remember
single
that.
big fight, every fight Lennox Lewis had, Colin Hart called against Lennox Lewis. Because he wasn't a true Brit.
I remember reading Colin Hart's. I think he was writing for the Sun for that fight, and I remember reading it in a Tesco in London.
Okay.
Him picking Mike Tyson to beat Lennox Lewis, and Tyson was years past his best, and Lennox was kind of still prime. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. People, because Tyson is such an incredible thing to look at. You look at him when he fights as a force of nature. It's a beautiful aesthetic thing when you watch. If you ever seen young Tyson training, it's just insane. It's incredible. But I think it fools a lot of people that to the fundamental truths of how your body ages. What a great fighter Lennox was. The stylistic advantages he had, height. He had reach.
But on that, James, that was true 10, 20, 30 years ago. Even now, the highlights of Tyson training, hitting the pads and great hand speed, that did so much mythology about a 58-year-old. He's not going to do that in the ring. The opponent's going to be trying to not be hit, not a trainer wanting him to look good. It's like they're totally different things. But brilliant. Okay, and Lennox as well. I agree. I think Lennox, for me, I think it was a shame he changed the sort of style of his boxing after defeat. He was so exciting. He could have been so dynamic. I think if he changed trainers before he got defeated, he might have had a sort of hybrid. But the safety first Lennox, I still think is fantastic, but wasn't as exciting as the earlier Lennox.
No, when you see what he did to Razor Ruddock, that sort of. But look at, I would say again, and the same trainer, Vlad Klitschko. When he was young, he had every punch in the book, and very occasionally in his fights, he would open up, and you'd say, "Where has this guy been?" Or, of course, he's got no chin at all. Manny Stewart, you're a great trainer, but I absolutely agree. In terms, if you want the blood and guts, you don't go to Manny Stewart fighters, really. One of those big, tall guys,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and so it's obviously not Iron Mike. So who do you put number one best heavyweight of all time?
Ali. I think that's fairly straight. Look, I have a sort of my heavyweight top 10. Tyson might not make my top 10 in heavyweights. I've got certainly ahead of Tyson. I've got Ali, Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano. I wouldn't say James Jeffries, Lennox, a few others. But Ali, because of he happened to be around when there's a lot of great heavyweights. Him outpointing Sonny Liston is one of the great fights. So I encourage so many people to watch that fight.
Which one?
The first Sonny Liston fight.
Yeah.
And coming back twice. First guy to regain him. He was a great boxer in a great era, and to be dominant in an era like that really kind of makes him the greatest for me.
My favorite is Cleveland Williams. I think Ali fight, and that was where he was. Because again, Ali was kind of not known as a huge puncher. Often went long in fights. But he was vicious against Cleveland Williams. That's my fight for Ali. Have you ever met any? You've been to a few sort of press events. Have you ever met any boxers in real life?
No.
Okay. Are there any you would like to meet, or particularly not want to meet?
I'm sure there's a few I'd like to meet. Be fun. I think Terry Marsh is a really interesting character. You had that murder charge. And then he's a Liberal Democrat candidate and retired unbeaten world champion. Very interesting character.
Right.
Don't know how. I'd need security with me, but as far as not want to meet, I think Adrian Broner, and he's a very needy dude. See, there are a lot of unpleasant people in any sport. But he's so needy. I find that really cloying. It's like he needs a father figure or something. And he's got a dad. His dad's there, brushing his hair afterwards. But the Floyd thing, that was clearly like this father-son relationship.
Yeah.
And he ended up being spurned, and he didn't take it well. It was all very weird.
Is he still active, Broner?
He's definitely active on social media. I know that because sometimes he'll beg for money because he was always about billions. And then sometimes he'll be flexing. He'll be showing obviously a fake stash of cash. I can't even remember last time I saw him fight.
No, I remember. I mean, that's a great answer. I remember him flushing $100 bills down the loo on social media about 10 years ago.
Did he do that? That's him in a nutshell. Complete
Terrible.
moron.
What about the most predictable result you've seen? Whenever you thought, I knew that was going to happen.
Because I used to bet a lot on boxing, and betting on Floyd Mayweather was so profitable because people would always convince themselves that what was obviously going to happen, wouldn't happen. I would say most Floyd fights, but certainly Pacquiao against Hatton, because again, a lot of people convince themselves, it's at 10 stone. Hatton's never been beaten at 10 stone. I think, Pacquiao has every single advantage over him. He's faster, hits harder, he's a better boxer, he's got a better chin. This is going to end very badly, and I had a large bet on that.
Same, very close betting lines as well. So brilliant. I think Mayweather over Hatton and Mayweather over Pacquiao for me were two big bets because the betting was too close.
It was ridiculous that I would pretty much say, because I used to write about, I should do boxing write-ups for betting sites, boxing betting write-ups, and I wrote about Floyd Pacquiao. I said that Floyd is really a bigger, better version of Juan Manuel Marquez. All the stylistic traits that Marquez gave Pacquiao so much trouble and ended up on top on that, incredible series of fights. Floyd is a bigger, better version. And everyone kept talking about how many punches Pacquiao was going to throw. How many lands per round. And I said, but you look at what happens to every single Floyd opponent. The amount they start throwing just like plummets, because in the first couple of rounds, he's just feeling you out. But then he starts countering. And then you go, oh, God, I don't like that. I don't like being hit in the face. I look like an idiot. And then they start overthinking and the fight's over. Once Floyd had felt you out over those first 2 rounds, the fight was over. You were not going to win a single round.
Yeah, great. And there was also sort of that whole thing of Floyd being kind of not really being liked because he's not that exciting, that I think there's potentially people are always backing his opponent because they want him to win. And
this happens so often. It's insane. Now, Floyd was pretty smart in that the more boring his fights got, the more money he made, because originally, of course, he was Pretty Boy Floyd, and he was quite a flamboyant. He was a bit like Ray Leonard in the way he fought. The torch passed from Oscar De La Hoya as the money fighter and the biggest money fighter in sport to Floyd when Floyd beat him, and then said, "Now I'm Money Mayweather." And that was the guy who was like the king of bling. He was like, very disrespectful. Like, everyone go, "Oh, can't wait to see this guy get beat." And that's pretty much what happened. He got more and more defensive, very safety first. There were multiple times he could have knocked guys out. Marquez is a good example. When he fought him, he knocked him down. Marquez was open for the knockout rest of the fight, but Floyd had this thing. It was a vanity thing that I want everyone to see this masterpiece of 12 rounds of me. I genuinely believe Floyd could have knocked him out at any point.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned that early phase, that Pretty Boy Floyd phase. I always forget about that about Mayweather because it feels like, I always, and sometimes you see like clips of those early days. That was what Floyd is so different. So that's what Floyd used to be. That's how he was heading that way.
Because I remember the Diego Corrales fight. It's just a masterpiece. And Diego Corrales was, legitimate world champion. He was bigger than Floyd, had this like reach advantage. And a very, very tough guy. But Floyd just absolutely dominates him, knocks him down 5 times, and eventually stops him.
I remember that fight because it was a pick'em. It was a 50-50 fight. I remember it well. And okay, so what's the best upset or the most surprising result you've seen?
I'll always say George Foreman over Michael Moorer. Because and I think it's nuts that could ever have happened. I think it's a beautiful thing because everyone liked Big George but they thought it's never happening. Much like it would be as much a surprise of Tyson coming back and beating Jake Paul. To me, it was that level of insanity that you can, after 20 years, regain the heavyweight championship. Against a legitimate champion, not the greatest heavyweight or one of the greatest heavyweights ever, but still a guy who at that age, after the beatings you've taken, you should be no business being in a ring with, and to do a 1-punch knockout, that sort of was truly astonishing.
That version of Foreman is the second iteration of Foreman is crazy because he I reckon it's deceptive because he was so big, but he looks so slow. But I reckon maybe he wasn't that slow, and he just looks slow because the power he generates from not that much like seeming speed and it's extraordinary. I saw someone on Twitter write that somebody needs to they need to do a forensic scientific examination in his power because it is unique. I don't know anyone else who's got that style.
Because he throws arm punches a lot of the time.
Yeah,
he's not like got a great deal of torque going on, or like that whip-like action that you associate with great power punching.
Yeah,
George Foreman will just throw a arm punch, and you'll see the guy's eyes just go.
Oh yeah,
it's really weird. And by today's standards, is not the Foreman of the 70s. When you see him like literally lift Joe Frazier off his feet with a punch, he's 15 stone something. You know, he was a giant back then, well, big guy back then, but now he'd be tiny. It is genuine. I totally agree. Like, there's someone should examine that because it's fascinating.
What's the worst bit of sportsmanship you've ever seen in a boxing match?
I'll go with my boy Andrew Gallotta for this one against Riddick Bowe. But even though it basically handed him the title, even though, you know, it's the strangest thing I've ever seen, I think, in sports. Andrew Gallotta doing the exact same thing twice. Clearly winning a fight, you're going to be heavyweight champion in the world. Like a white heavyweight champion, you're going to make tens of millions of pounds. You know, Poles all around the world are going to love you. And he throws it away by doing several 3-punch combos to the balls of his opponent. And terrible piece of sportsmanship. Just
crazy.
A really strange kind of self-destructive thing. Whenever I meet Polish dudes, and there's quite a few in Birmingham, you know, they'll be working in kitchens, working in bars. We get to know, I always say Andrew Gallotta, and they go, oh, it's like a national shame.
Right.
You know, it really is something else.
You talk about mental midgets earlier, like Gallotta's mind was not always there, that's for sure. He was
so strange.
Lennox blew him away in a minute or two, I think, didn't he? Lennox?
He did, yeah. First round.
Okay, so there's a two-parter here. So is there anything that you do differently when assessing fights? I think we've covered that a little bit in terms of the scoring, but pre-match, when you're looking at matchups, how you assess them differently?
I think when I'm scoring fights, Stanley, I seem to rank ring generalship higher than most people because I know it's fourth on the thing. So Bernard Hopkins, I have him winning. You know, he never thinks he lost a fight. I kind of agree with him for the most part. I ranked what he did so highly because it's so hard to do.
Did you think he did enough to beat Calzaghe?
I did, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't die on that hill. Because I know he was spoiling. He's always fouling. He does this great thing, Bernard, where he fouls a guy and then raps the referee. He was hitting me on the head. The exact foul that he's committing. And then the ref goes, oh, yeah, both of you guys cut that out.
Yeah, nice.
And the other guy's going, I didn't do anything. But one thing I will say, in terms of, I do slightly differently because everyone knows that styles make fights. Almost boxing fans know that. I think just as often physics makes fights. I've seen guys that were a terrible matchup for a boxer, you know, should have given them nightmare stylistically. They didn't get the chance to enact that because the other guy hit a lot harder, and therefore they didn't want to. Once you get, it's kind of cliche. Once you do get hit hard, you may be a stylistic nightmare for that guy, but you've got to risk throwing power punches, which take longer. The shortest distance between 2 points is a line. So one thing I often do as a brief sort of rule of thumb is who throws the best straight punches. That's a good way. If you know nothing else about a fighter, then they throw better straight punches than the other guy. That guy is probably going to win the fight.
That's so interesting.
Larry Holmes went 48-0 with a world-class jab. He got knocked down multiple times. But that jab set up everything. He was defensive, brilliant defensive jab, but also offensive. If I could give a fighter one thing that was world class, I would give them a world class jab above power, above resilience, above heart, and all the other things that people say are so important.
That's brilliant. I've not thought about. I love that. I'm gonna think about that next time I'm looking at a fighter. Definitely, that's brilliant. Okay, is there anything in the sport that you believe to be true that most others would disagree with?
Yeah, it's Roberto Duran is a little overrated. I will say he's underrated by boxing casuals, but overrated by the hardcore.
Nice.
Hardcore fans worship him, and to a point where they'll just make excuses for him that they won't make for any other fighter.
Yeah.
Like they'll say for the No Mask fight, they'll say, oh, he was, he blew up, he was out partying, celebrating. Duran himself has changed his story on that fight multiple times.
Yeah.
It's a different story every time. I think Leonard perhaps just had his number in that particular fight. I still think it's greatest lightweight. Like if someone said he's the greatest fighter ever, I wouldn't necessarily argue with them. Because that dude was, I think he was 69-1 when he beat Leonard, which is just, that's just an insane record. And then to beat one of the greatest of all time is phenomenal. But I would just say by the hardcore, he's a little overrated. That they treat him as if he didn't have some very embarrassing losses, and you did. Part of it was that you came back from that.
I think, James, what is clear is you have just the right amount of contrarian in you that makes you. You have to, though, to make you a good judge of boxing. You have to be prepared to ignore. We've got this big thing of, certainly with what we're doing when we're analysing the betting side of things, the wisdom of the crowd is not really something you want to pay too much attention to when it comes to boxing, because
boxing it's surprisingly tribal for an individual sport. People get very tribal about their favorites.
Oh yeah,
and they make really bad decisions. Like you said, when they look at someone on the pads. Like I remember Ricky Hatton before the Floyd Mayweather fight. Even I was wondering, because I already had this huge bet on Floyd, and I was like, oh my god, he looks amazing on the pads. But Floyd is not a pad. Moving target. You're not going to get the favorable refereeing you got in Manchester. I knew that, but no, I thought Joe Cortez did a horrible job in that fight. I thought he was very biased, but you were always going to get a Vegas referee. And Hatton does rely. He said himself, it's not a tickling contest in there. What he meant that, I bend the rules. Of course, there's a bit. He leads with his head sometimes. But even I was worried about. But then I think, no, it's a pad. Floyd is not a boxing pad.
It's funny. Like you do get you'll assess a fight for months. You make your opinion, you stick with it, and you still get those questions that. Oh, hold on, I just seen that's putting me off a little bit. Like you got to be pretty stubborn to ignore them.
Totally.
Okay, so I like that one. What about do you have a favorite boxing quote?
Yeah, I mean, I've bad-mouthed Tyson quite a lot, so I should at least give him that one. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. It's sort of, it's very funny, and a load of people who don't know boxing know that quote, and but the ironic thing is that it applies to Tyson a great deal. When he did get punched in the face, and when the bully got bullied by Evander Holyfield, he didn't really have a plan anymore.
That's so true.
When he lost Cus D'Amato, the core three, Jimmy Jacobs and the other guy, when he lost those guys, Tyson really didn't have a plan anymore.
That's so true.
He was getting punched in the face quite a lot. So
I think Tyson's the best highlight reel in the history of the sport. His highlights look amazing. Not the opponents, but the highlights. And for sound bites, absolutely wonderful. Even last week, when he was interviewed by a young girl, who must have been like 10 years old. Did you see this one? You've got to
come on.
I'm going to send you this. She's asked him about being a legend, and he just goes off on one saying, "No, we're all dust." He's swearing. He's like, "I'm dead. Nothing of this matters." And what he's saying is brilliant, and it's powerful, and it's emotional, and it's all existential nonsense, brilliantly spoken by angry Tyson. But this little girl is there going, "No one's told me that before. You still believe in Father Christmas." And
I saw it quoted. I haven't seen the film, but I have seen that quoted.
I'll send you the link. It's just tremendous. It's really, really. I'm the conqueror. Lennox is no conqueror. Oh, that was good.
That's just phenomenal. That's as a piece of spoken word rap. It's incredible. I'm certain.
Did he plan that? Had he rehearsed that, or did he just come up with that? Because, like you say, it was brilliant.
I think a little bit of both, maybe that my style of impetuous. All that stuff. It's it's genuinely brilliant. I think he had those ideas in his head, and then they threw a few other things in there.
My other favorite Tyson, after when he lost to Kevin McBride, his parting words was he was going to fade into Bolivia.
That's brilliant. Oh, bless him. Yeah.
Now, what about, okay, so we can rattle through these ones. Best boxing movie, book, and podcast.
I can't go against Raging Bull for the movie. I watched when I was a kid. Somebody Up There Likes Me. Rocky Graziano's story.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a good one. But yeah, Raging Bull is out there.
Yeah.
As far as book goes, Unforgivable Blackness: The Rise and Fall of Jack Johnson. I don't know if you've read that one.
Yeah, no, I put it on the Christmas list. Okay.
Oh, do, but also there's a documentary. I think it might be in 2 parts, but it was Unforgivable Blackness, same thing, but made by Ken Burns, who made The History of Jazz, the famous HBO documentary. Ken Burns is a phenomenal documentary maker. There's so much. You think you know a fair amount about Jack Johnson, but there's loads of stuff about him in the film. He's such a clever dude,
right?
Completely amoral, but him being sort of in a stadium of like 100,000 people who were quite willing to lynch him, and like the corner throwing racial slurs at him, and him just smiling back. The strength of character in that dude is unreal.
Okay, great. Podcast? Do you listen to many boxing podcasts?
See, I don't. I used to listen to a thing. Well, I used to watch a TV show. It was in Canada, called In This Corner with Russ Amber. Do you know Russ Amber? He's a cut man.
Okay.
Very sort of knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And very, very, unshy to give his opinions. Yeah. He should do it. It was a half-hour show. I used to download it off a boxing site, and with a guy called Darren Titian, who was just a regular sports guy, and Russ Amber was the boxing guy. He would give his opinion, say what should happen in boxing, that kind of thing. That was great.
Great. Brilliant. This has been fantastic. The final question is, if you were a pro boxer, what would be your entrance music?
Mike Tyson against Razor Ruddock. I think the second fight, he enters to Welcome to the Terror Dome by Public Enemy. It's one of my favorite ring entrances. I like the idea that I'd be terrifying. So yeah, that's a great track. And when Tyson comes into it, it's got a whole kind of extra meaning to it, that this is like terrifying. Razor Ruddock in the ring going, oh no, not
that Mike Tyson Public Enemy era. Those were good entrances. Nothing's come. Yeah. Brilliant. So you'd go for Public Enemy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, James. That has been so fun. It's brilliant. Like, I don't know when we connected on Twitter, but I've seen your takes. I knew this would be good, but that has been fascinating. You've taught me stuff I didn't know, so that was amazing. Grateful for your time.
Bless you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Really fun. Can people follow you? What's your shout out for your Insta or your Twitter?
My Twitter's The Cold Gun, all one word, like the Kate Bush song.
Yep. Brilliant. Fantastic. All right, James. Well, like I say,
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Talk to you soon.
Nice one. Thank you.
Okay, yes.